Dellalian. The first time I listened to his compositions 5 years ago, a whole constellation of infinitely abstract, disquieting and elating sounds rushed in, which made one concentrate, meditate, seek and become acquainted. However, it appears that there are not many compositions, and most of them are not recorded. The composer is no longer alive. In the process of revealing the lifestyle and time of this man, born into a family that had gone through exile, the Second World War and repatriation, we met his family members, friends, co-workers, and the following picture was born.
Ատենքի արևելյան կողմը գարնաև մի ուրիշ
There was an Armenian colony in the western part of Athens called Fix. It was also known as Durhuti. There were old, shabby earthen houses. There was also a church made of wood. We read in Harutiun Dellalian's diary, "In my childhood, my friend Stelios and I would go from our district of Durhuti in Athens to Falero Beach to set our handmade boats in the waters of the sea. The waves took them far into the future. This water was a blue fairy tale in my life. It was deep, boundless, powerful. We were 8 or 9 years old, Stelios and his sister Atimura, to whom I was attracted. These, the unforgettable images of my happy, though rather poor, childhood."
Մեծամասնությունը բայց պստիկ խրճիթներու մեջ, որ շինված իրենց ցերկերով շինված.
Many people lived in little metallic or wooden huts made with their own hands in difficult conditions. But even under these conditions, they managed to open colleges and build churches. There were times when the Armenians had to do blue-collar jobs. You know, what the Greeks did not want to do, the Armenians did. But those times passed, and the Armenians managed to become educated and qualified. Then the war with the Germans started. Very difficult times began. Many hungry people were just falling down in the streets. It was starvation. There was no food. In the years of German occupation, Harutiun's father, Rouben Dellalian, was in the Liberation Army. His mother, Mari Pashayan, and her little children spent long years of expectation and fear in their little hut in Durhuti until the time for immigration. People thought the Soviet Union to be the promised land, heaven, and when immigration began, there were a lot of records concerning immigration in the Armenian primacy, which was the seat of the bishop. There was such a dense crowd, it was impossible to enter, and even Greeks asked to be taken to Armenia. I can still see them, and some Greeks did come. This immigration, which was a very inopportune and criminal operation, took place in 1946 to 47, when there was almost a famine in Armenia. There was no place to live, and the people living in Armenia were exhausted. Why did they bring 100,000 more people to add to the misery of these exhausted people? In 1947, they began to give them plots of land in deserted places around Yerevan on which to build houses. They were also given loans of 30,000 rubles, which was only enough to dig the base of the house and build the walls, and the rest was on the repatriates' shoulders. The Dellalians began to build a house in the recently built district of Zeytun in Yerevan. This generation had built a house many times and then had to leave. This time they were building in their motherland. Now the street is named after Harutiun Dellalian.
Երբ որ ինքը 10-ամյակը ավարտել էր, ընդունվել էր համալսարանի բիոլոգիայի բաժին։
After leaving school, Harutiun gets a place at Yerevan State University in the Faculty of Biology. But in the same year, his father has a serious accident, and Harutiun does not go to university in September. He starts to work to support his family. Then he joins the army.
Որպեսզի ընտանիքի հոգսը մի փոքր թեթևացնի։ Եվ այսպես ինքը աշխատում է։
After his military service, Harutiun returns to Yerevan. He gets married and continues to work in a milling machines factory. Many years later, together with Harutiun's co-workers, we are in the workshop, once full of noise, right in front of his machine. Harutiun used to come to the factory, neat and clean, and at the end of the working day he had turned completely black, covered with the dust of cast iron. He was fighting with the metals, and then we were looking at the metals together and finding different figures, imagining different shapes and listening to voices. At that time, Harutiun was studying at music college. I was a technologist of this workshop. Once the director came and asked where Harutiun was. I answered that he was away from work, studying. The director became nervous. He said that without Harutiun, the work in the workshop for making levers would stop, and they decided to go and bring him back immediately. We went to the college and found the classroom where Harutiun was taking a piano examination. The director entered the classroom with great noise, saying, "Harutiun, what are you doing? The plans are lagging behind." Harutiun was taken aback. He looked amazed at what was happening. The examiner said, "He is taking an exam." And the director answered, "We don't need an exam, we need the plan."
Harutiun was burning to learn. He was thirsty to read and study. He was a self-educated man. He started from scratch. He didn't know a single note, but he was reading and studying day and night because nothing else attracted him.
Կարդում էր, ուսումնասիրում էր, որովհետև այդ մարդուն ուրիշ ոչինչ չէր գրավում։
Եվ եկան տարբեր ասպարեզի մարդիկ։
People from different spheres came to the National Conservatoire to study music. And the amazing and wonderful man, Harutiun Dellalian, came too. He was a worker. We didn't know him. Of course, the fact itself was phenomenal, because it is not logical. How can one become a composer when illiterate in music? But the phenomenon was that Harutiun was a composer by nature, in essence, by his very vocation.
Երբ որ ինքը ընդունվեց պետական կոնսերվատորիա, արդեն ստիպված էր դուրս գալ գործարանից, որովհետև
When Harutiun entered Yerevan State Conservatoire of the Komitas, he had to leave the factory as there were no extra correspondence or evening courses in the conservatoire. He had to go to classes every morning. Actually, there were 3 students in our family, our 2 daughters and Harutiun.
Among the young men of 17 to 18, the 35-year-old Harutiun must have looked strange, but not alone, as he was on the way to revealing the mystery of music. He was writing concertos, symphonies and sonatas. He gave performances. Soon he became a member of the Composers' Union. But the turning point was his sonata, Dedication to Komitas, written in 1982. The first performer of which was Artur Papazian, first in Yerevan and some years later in New York.
Welcome to a very special concert from New York's famed Carnegie Hall. I'm Martin Buxban, and we're about to witness a rare musical adventure. The performance of all 24 of the etudes by Frédéric Chopin, played by the Armenian-American pianist Artur Papazian. Ever since his Carnegie Hall debut in March 1985, Mr. Papazian has been hailed as a great romantic virtuoso.
In 1985, if I'm not mistaken, in America, it was the pianist Arthur Papazian's American debut at Carnegie Hall in New York. I lived in Boston and went to New York to be present at that concert. The program included a composition by an Armenian composer whom I didn't know, Harutiun Dellalian, a piano sonata, Dedication to Komitas.
շատ հետաքրքիր հայտագիր էր ռեպերտուար ծրագիր, այսինքն դասական դաշնամուրային.
It was a most interesting event, a repertoire of classical piano pieces, including the sonata by Franz Liszt. And in the second part of the program, Harutiun Dellalian's sonata was played.
Ստեղծագործություն, որ ավարտվեց
When the composition was over, I was fascinated.
գերեց այդ ստեղծագործությունը.
After the concert, when I went to congratulate the pianist, I asked about the composer.
Արթուրին շնորհավորելու
I didn't know whether he was alive and where he lived. I found out that he was alive and that he lived in Armenia.
Արդյոք կենթանի է, որտեղ է բնակվում, եւ ես իմացա, որ այո, Հարություն Դելալյանը ապրում է Հայաստանում.
After the concert, the New York Times wrote, "The most engrossing work done was Harutiun Dellalian's sonata, Dedication to Komitas, a haunting composition that makes use of chant, folk melodies, and the strummed insides of the piano. The music halls and critics of the world discovered a new name."
Ես արեցա իր երաժշտությունը լսելու Harutiun Papazani կատարմամբ.
I had the opportunity of hearing Harutiun's music at Arthur Papazian's performance. The first composition that I heard was the sonata dedicated to Komitas. Something happened to me. I seemed to find something that I'd not been able to find anywhere else. At that time we used to talk about Armenian national art. Many people thought how Armenian national art should be. That was a question that many people were pondering over. We kept seeking, searching, and I suddenly found that Dellalian is a composer in whose compositions the national character is quite strong.
I took Harutiun's address and wrote a letter to him. I wrote about my impressions of the concert and his sonata, and I asked him to compose a new piece for my orchestra in Boston. I intended to perform it in America.
Բոստոնում, որը մեկ պրեմիերան ուրեմն կատարենք Ամերիկայում, այդպես սկսվեց։
After Aram Karabekian's proposal to compose a new piece, Dellalian leaves for Dilijan, the composer's house. The old man wanders in the mountains, ponders over loneliness, recollects our history, the genocide, the migration, Dellalian said in an interview. The old man's character is in the solo performance of the French horn, and the violins demonstrate the motion of process. And thus, Topophono was born. It was first performed in 1986 in Boston. Topophono is composed for string orchestra, piano, and French horn off stage. The pianist was Artur Papazian. We had invited Dellalian, but unfortunately he could not come. He was not allowed.
Yes, Harutiun
I said to Harutiun, Harutiun, cheer up. You shouldn't be disappointed. He was so excited and so depressed. I said, don't lose heart. We shall go together, I promise you. That was a question of principle, and we went together. It was wonderful. The society had organized a great reception. Harutiun's composition had been a great success. A year later, the composition was performed on tour. We again invited Dellalian to be present at the concert. Unfortunately, once again he could not come because of the communist regime. But about 10 days after the concert, he came. It was strange that permission should have been given after the concert, you know. That was the only time we met.
His latest composition, which I had the opportunity of hearing recently, fascinated me a great deal. It is unlike any composition I'd ever known. This is completely sacred music, not spiritual, but sacred.
Harutiun Dellalianն այն կոմպոզիտորներից է, որի ժամանակից առաջ էր։
Harutiun Dellalian was ahead of his time. He is still ahead of his time. His compositions are really very few, 25, 26 pieces. And in all of them, his inner voice is clearly heard. In 1987, Dellalian was awarded the Golden Wreath and Superstar of the Southern California Motion Picture Council. The number of his compositions and performances was increasing. Correspondence and articles were flowing to the small house on Kamarak Street in the district of Zeytun.
Our house was quite small. We didn't have rooms of our own, and we all witnessed our father's creativity. Amazingly, my father always asked our opinion, and now I wonder why he did so. Maybe because he wanted me to be more aware of what he was doing, or maybe he wanted me to become wiser and not to feel alienated. He didn't want me to be just a pianist who performs his compositions. He used to ask me, "What do you think? How would you play this part? Or how would you solve this or that technical or musical mode if you were the performer?" We had such discussions many times, and I feel much enriched by such memories.
Ինչ կարծիք ունես, ինչպես կնվագես։
Հունաստանից հենց Զավեն Գրիգորյանը եւ
4 Armenians born in Greece had been invited to Athens by Souren Grigorian and some other people from the charity organization. 2 famous historians, Haraj Bartikian, an academic at Athens Academy, Simon Grigorian, an ethnographer, the translator of Homer, Harutiun Dellalian, composer, and me as a writer.
Եվ կոմպոզիտոր Harutiun Dellalian. Այս 4-ից հրավիրեցին.
Was filled with alarm. There were public meetings, army, tanks, uncertainty, and an invitation to visit the birthplace. Many of his relatives were not alive. Memories, nostalgia, grief. Every city has its own melody, Dellalian writes. After the first night spent in Athens, I jumped out of my bed early in the morning. I was woken by the sounds that had been hidden in my mind for 41 years. Those were the voices I had heard in my childhood, the voices of the fishermen who were praising their fresh catch. When they arrived in Athens, they were all full of enthusiasm, fascinated with Athens, Greece, Greek culture. They were all childhood memories. Harutiun had been very little when he had left Athens. All these things were still stamped upon his memory, and he lived in quite a different world. Voices and faces from childhood. Here is the Armenian church of Durkuti, where he had studied in the classes about shoot, bud, bloom and flower. And what a miracle! His first teacher, His Eminence Gyonjian, with white hair, frail body, lively eyes, and faces, 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 all unknown but so dear. Images from childhood that you cannot forget. Weeks before, the newspapers had announced that the meeting with the guests from Armenia would take place in the Hall of Pontians on the 7th of December 1988. On that day, more than 500 people had gathered. The hall was full, and there was not even room to stand. It was a great event in the history of the Armenian colony in Greece. It had been many years since these great scientists and the distinguished musician, Harutiun Dellalian, had arrived at their birthplace. The people were waiting impatiently. After the scientists had made their speeches, it was our dear Harutiun's turn to speak. Everybody was tense. There was silence in the hall. And Harutiun began to speak. He spoke about Armenian music, about its importance, about its vital mission in the history of Armenia. He spoke about the soul of Armenian music, which came from our history, our native land, our people's hearts, souls, from our sufferings and working life. He said, every song comes from our people's minds and hearts. He recalled how Komitas gave a handful of blood for a note, for Armenian music, and at the end he performed one of his compositions. There was a ceremonial meeting on the 7th of December. Harutiun performed his sonata dedicated to Komitas. In the evening, we saw some circles on a map of Armenia on TV. We thought that there might have been the usual earthquake in Armenia. It didn't occur to us that it had been such a destructive one. The next morning, I went down the hotel hall to have breakfast. I saw that the TV was on, but there was still no picture. The screen was grey, and written in black letters was Vivliki Katastrofi. Vivliki Armenia, biblical catastrophe in biblical Armenia.
Vivliki կատաստրոֆից in Vivliki Armenia.
From Harutiun's diary. We still had not cured our numerous wounds before one more was added. The pain was twice as strong since I was far away and could not help in any way. We participated in meetings. The whole community, with all its infrastructures, was involved in fundraising. On the 11th of December, there was a requiem at the Armenian Peristeres church. Every time I prayed to God, I asked for well-being and health for my family. This time, I prayed for my people. Many years later, we prayed for the memory of Harutiun's soul and for his nearest and dearest. December, Athens. Rain, rain, rain. 15 years after Harutiun's death, you find me in Athens and ask me to tell you some details of our friendship with Harutiun. It is very difficult for me to speak about that. I remember he used to inspire me in my work, and perhaps so did we without realizing. We were always together. We went to his concerts together with his family and friends. Some people envied him for his roaring success, which he had achieved in such a short time. Not everyone could have achieved it. It was not an easy thing to have a big family and have to meet its needs, but he was a very strong man, and I am very proud of having been his friend. Great Athens was wrapped in twilight and lights. One more trip of a lifetime, which I had looked forward to for so long and which turned out to be the most startling one, is over. I am hurrying to reach my native land, Armenia, my wounded and mourning Armenia. These are the last sentences in Dellalian's Greek diary.
Gnel հետքերով, անցնել նույն արահետներով, զգալ, ու լինել մոտիկ, և վերջապես գտնել.
To follow the tracks, to walk along the same roads, to feel and be close to him and finally find. The city that my father had left a long time before was very dear to me. That city was sunny, but at the same time rainy Athens. I guess it was the scent and the tracks of my ancestors, those of my father and my grandfather, which made the city, which I'd visited for the first time, so dear to me. An inexplicable feeling had gripped me. I wanted to see them. I was standing in front of the garden where my father used to spend time with his dear mother. It was raining. I was walking along the same roads and thinking what he had been feeling when many years later he appeared in this garden again. I was looking for my father, and was he looking for his mother, and so much more. Then they left for their motherland. Those were difficult times. Motherland. What is it finally? He was standing firmly on this land, and he could not live without it. He had found supernatural strength in this land. It had made him so strong. Then, some years later, when I lived abroad, I understood him better. Where am I now? What are we looking for in this life? I'm looking at these pictures and thinking that these colors, this warmth, are our essence, and we cannot live any other way, and we cannot run away from ourselves. And why should I run away? I am as I am because of my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. And I'm happy that we have such memories of when everything is alive, everything is breathing and living, where everybody is living.
Երբ մենք հանդիպեցինք Հարությունի հետ, ես դեռ Հայաստան չէի այցելել, չի եղել իր։ Այդքան օրը որ մենք շատ ինտենսիվ
When I met Harutiun, I still had not been to Armenia. During those few days that we spent together, we talked a lot. We talked not only about music, but also about different things. And Harutiun used to repeat, Aram, you should come to Armenia. We should go to the mountains and shout. I still remember those words. It was some 7 years after that I first came to Armenia. Unfortunately, Harutiun was no longer alive. Now, when I go out of town, to the heart of nature, in the mountains, those words are ringing in my ears like a bell. And Harutiun's music is indeed a shout from an inner world.
Մեր բնության մեջ լեռները այդ խոսքը այսպես զանգակի պես ականջումս կա եւ իրապես իր երաժշտությունը գոռոց է ներքին աշխարհի
The spirit seems to be walking on the waves. There are lights playing on them. And he walks and walks and walks. What does he want? Where is he going? After listening for an hour, I saw that the spirit had disappeared. I heard the final accord. The music was over. And what did I see? I saw a little newborn child on the screen. He was naked, so little, so sweet, with his lovely eyes open. And I said, yes, he survives. That's Harutiun. That's the composer. He is alive. He's not dead. He radiates in the new lights and he must rise. Harutiun will become a well-known, distinguished composer. He is not with us, but blessed is the artist that lives on after him. And Harutiun will live. I am sure of that.
Եվ Արթուրը կապրի, ես հավատացած եմ դրան։